Let's take a look at fillets and corners. These are often confused, and we'd like to know the difference between these two and when you should use one versus another. What's the design philosophy here? Catia workbench is the 2D workbench. Now, Catia is a parametric modeler, so even solids are usually based on a sketch. In Sketcher, we use the corner icon to put the roundings inside the sketch. In part design, the sketches would all be rectangular or blocky, and the fillets would be made outside of the sketch in the 3D world. Here we see a good example of that. Here, the sketcher with its corners would produce a shape that's identical to the fillet sketch, but produced in a much different way from different sketches. So both shapes are identical, just two different methods. Is there a correct method? Usually the answer is yes, there usually is a correct method. Let's discuss that. Sometimes we call it rounding on the inside or the outside. Roundings created inside the sketch versus roundings created outside on the solid itself. Usually outside is best. Now, what is a wraparound? This happens when the rounding happens outside of a plane. So for instance, in the bottom case, you have an orange fillet that flows into a blue fillet. So that fillet kind of wraps around from the orange linear area into another plane for the blue filleting. Now, arguably, you could place the orange roundings inside of a sketch and then put the blue roundings in a fillet in 3D. However, that just doesn't make sense. In order to modify the shape, you'd have to search around to find where the rounding was made. Was it inside? Was it outside? If you double-click the blue fillet, it would go directly into edit mode. So it makes sense that we would make all of these fillets blue so that double-clicking any one of them would instantly put you into edit mode for the fillet. So for wraparounds, the answer is easy. Parts with wraparounds should be designed with fillets and not corners. But what about non-wraparound shapes like this one we see here, where it's basically just a linear rounding that comes out of the sketch? Well, in general, the answer again is filleting is the better option. There's a lot of reasons for that. But you're going to have to use your judgment. Here's a case where it makes more sense to use the cornering option in a sketch rather than the fillet option. Here, on the left-hand side, we see what the sketch would look like for this part, and it looks like it would be easily drawn this way. But can you imagine trying to conceptualize the straight lines to make for the solid fillet? This would be really difficult. So in this particular case, corners make sense. And now for the fillets, there's a lot of other cool advantages, like variable fillets are very easy to do in the fillet option, where in Sketcher you'd have to really be challenged to make these with with several sketches, multiple sketches with some kind of a surface swept. So now let's demonstrate both of these options. We'll start with the corner, and we'll go through a lot of the options for the corner. Okay, here we are going to talk about the corner option, and we have a sketch already pre-made here that we're going to demonstrate on. So I'm going to double-click this sketch in order to go into the Sketcher mode. And usually in Catia there's a couple of floating toolbars. I'm going to dock them up at the top just to kind of get them out of the way so that they don't get in on top of our geometry. There we go. Now let's pull the corner option out right here. And let's pick the corner option. Now you'll notice that you have several different options for corner. Let's look at the default first. For the default, you can pick one line, you can pick another line, and you can place a corner. I'm going to Control Z to back out of that, because you can not only pick lines, but you can also pick the endpoint. And there you go. There's another corner option. Control Z. Now let's pick the corner icon again. And this time let's turn off this option. This was geometric constraints. Let's pick our two lines again. And this time you'll notice we did not get the tangencies here. Well, that's usually not a good thing. Usually you want to turn on the geometric constraints. So let's Control Z to back out, and let's turn it back on. And I'm also going to turn on this option for dimensional constraints. Select the corner option and pick one line, pick another line. And now when I place it, I not only get the geometric constraints, but I also get a dimensional constraint. Now I'm going to Control Z to back out of that. Okay, and let's pick the corner option. One of the things I like to do also is I like to turn off this snap to point option, because that makes it a lot smoother when I'm sliding this corner in and out. It makes it just a lot easier to slide. Okay, and then you place it and get your corner. Okay, I'm going to Control Z to back out of that. I'm going to show you how to key in a value for your corner. Let's select the corner option. Let's pick 1, 2. Now you'll notice up here is a radius value. Now a lot of times people think they have to come up here and select in the box. But I'm just going to be down here like this, and I'm just going to go to my keyboard and type in 20. Enter. Okay, so you don't actually have to leave your keyboard to come up here to do that. Okay, Control Z to back out of that again. Now let's say that you multi-select by selecting and dragging there. Now what I've multi-selected is actually the line and those two endpoints. And if I pick the corner option now, obviously there you can barely see the two endpoints are still highlighted. And my mouse really isn't doing anything, but if I key in 20 again, notice it's keying in up at the menu bar, then I get both radiuses, and in fact, if I change 1 to 10, they're both linked together as a function. Okay, so that's kind of nice sometimes. I backed out of that with Control Z. In fact, you can actually multi-select many corners and create all of them with 20. Oh, wow, that's a really cool option. Okay, Control Z to back out of that. Okay. Now let's select the corner option again, and this time we're going to go through some of these options here. Let's go to the very last one, where we select one line, another line. And then when we place our corner, we get the corner as before, but we get construction lines. Now let's do another one of the options. Let's pick this one right here. And this one is almost the same, except it just doesn't retrim the original lines. This is usually not what you want. Okay, let's pick the corner option again, and let's pick this one here. Well, this one looks just like this one, but it would look differently if we were looking at, say, a line here and a line here. If we were to pick this option and we pick here and here, it actually retrims the two straight lines. Okay, Control Z. But if we were to pick this and pick this option, it would not retrim. So all of these options are fairly easy to understand because they look like exactly what you're going to get. Okay, let's look at just a couple of more options for the corner option. And what I'm going to do is I'll delete a few of these things. Here we go. And now let's look at the tree. In our tree for the sketch, under the geometry, we have these circles that are created. Now we use the corner option, but when we use a corner option, I'll select it here and I'll create a corner. Let's just do a regular corner between this one and this one. And watching the tree, yes, I got a circle. So actually in the tree, a corner is just an easier way to do what you could do with circle options. With the circle options, you could pick to make a circle that's, let's say here, I'll do a circle that's tangent between this line, and this line. That puts a circle in there. And then I could use my trimming icons. Just here, double click my quick trim, and I'll trim that one off, this one, and this one. Now this is something I could have done with the corner option and setting things, but in fact each one of these could have been done with the circle, but corner just makes it so much easier. Okay, now we're going to look at doing the filleting in 3D using the fillet command. Now there's actually 3 different fillets commands. But we're going to look at the very first one, and we're going to look at most of the options, not all of them, but we're going to get a good overview of most of the options. Okay, let's look at some of the solid filleting options. First I wanted to show you that we have a rectangular and blocky sketch. Let's go to Sketcher. Let's pick that profile. Let's drag it out a little bit and do a mirrored extent and say OK. This is a good starter geometry. Okay. Let's pull my filleting icon out, and as we said earlier, we're only going to be looking at this first option, not these other 2 fillet options in this demo. Later we'll do the others. So let's pick our regular fillet option, and we get our fillet definition dialog box. Okay. And we can pick an edge, and we can pick another edge, and we can say OK. And we can double click it, and we could change the value to 20. Okay, there we go. You can double click it, and you can turn off an edge and turn on another edge. Okay. And if you double click your fillet, this little I call it the group bag. If you open that up, you'll see the edges that you've picked. A lot of times when you're trying to pick an edge, you accidentally get the face instead, and see there in the box it's a face. Okay, so you can pick that and say remove, and say close and preview. Hey, that looks pretty good. Now you can turn this one off and say OK. Now I can double click this one, and I can pick an entire face. That is sometimes what I want to do. And say OK. So I got this with just one mouse click. Okay. And in fact, let me Control Z to back out of some of these. Okay. And then let's do the fillet icon, and let's pick this vertical edge, and this face, and let's make them all 20. Okay. Well, now that is a really nice option there, and you can see the difference in the corners that you get of one way versus the other. Okay. Now let's try a couple more options. Let's double click this fillet, and let's turn off these 2 options. Say OK. Now let's do another fillet, a run-up fillet here. Now it's going to run all the way up here because it's tangent, and we have the tangency option set. If we did not have the tangency option, if we said minimal and said OK, we get a totally different option because it goes just as fast as far as the tangency. Let's take a look at some options over here. Take this and let's change this to a 5. So a 5. Okay. Much different look. Okay. Now you'll notice in the tree I have 2 fillets. I'm going to delete both of them. Hit the delete key and select and hit the delete key. Okay. Now I'm going to select the fillet option, and I'm going to put a fillet here, here, and here. And I'm going to forget to put this one on, and I'm going to put them as 20. And then I'm going to do a fillet around the top. I'll do a second fillet, and this one is going to be 10. And so I realize now that I forgot this fillet here. I simply double-click this fillet. Now you'll notice that the top fillet has disappeared because I'm actually right here in the tree. Nothing else past this fillet has actually been created at this point. So I can simply add that extra line in. Okay? And then hit my update button, and everything works just fine. Okay, now let's continue with this filleting along the bottom here. Let's zoom in a little bit. And let's run a fillet up this edge. And let's make it 10. Okay, and let's run another fillet up this edge. And let it be 10. Okay, now that's a nice looking corner there. Now let's do a similar corner right here, except this time let's pick an edge. Got the face, I turned it off, there you go. I'll pick all three of these edges and say OK. A much different look depending on the order and sequence in which you created the fillet. Okay, now let's continue with fillet option, and I'm going to select the fillet icon, and I'd like to talk about this option here to create a fillet based on chord rather than based on radius. In order to do that, I'm going to call up another starter model, and I'm going to give a little brief description of what this means. So here is our description of a chord fillet. A normal fillet gets a radius value that stays constant. The radius stays constant. But in the case of a chord fillet, the chord length remains constant. And let's take a look at these and how they happen in the real CAD world. Okay, I'm going to switch to a different model. This model is a really weird shape. It actually has an angle here that changes as we progress along this part, to a very sharp angle here, to a very dull angle here. Okay, and I'm going to put a fillet on this. And we're on the regular radius option, and let's pick this radius and let's put a value in of, say, 20. You know what, let's beef that up a little bit. We'll double click it and we'll make it 40. Okay, now that's a pretty interesting fillet, but it's not normally what they consider a good looking fillet in the automotive world from an aesthetic standpoint. Let's double click it again, and this time we're going to pick constant chord. And what you see, the chord there, and it's going to keep that length the same all the way along. The radius of the fillet is going to change. And look at that. Now normally in, say, the automotive world, or in places where you have rounded edges where people are looking at it, that's a much more even looking fillet to them, and it looks more pleasing to the eye. So that's the reason for having the chord option. And let's bump that down to something a little more reasonable, like say 20. There you go. Wow, that's a really good looking part there. So there is a lot of call for chord length fillets in aesthetic world. Okay, and let's stay on this model. Let me delete the edge fillet that we made. And let's demonstrate one of the other filleting options. One of the other filleting options is to not make a chorded fillet or a radius fillet, but to make a conic parameter fillet. Okay, now in order to talk about this, let's explain what a conic parameter is. In the Catia world, or I guess in the world, there's three types of conical shapes: a hyperbola, a parabola, and an ellipse. And of course, the circle is technically a conic also. In Catia, there's different parameter values that you set to determine whether the shape is a parabola, hyperbola, or ellipse. And in Catia, 0.5, if you key that value in, it's going to be a parabola. Greater than 0.5 would be a hyperbola, and less, and of course, would be an ellipse. So let's try that in our conical shape. Notice our parameter here is 0.5, so that would actually give us a parabola. And let's pick this here, and let's pick OK. And so this actually is not a radius here on the corner. In fact, if I go to my measure icon and I pick this edge, I'm not going to get a radius. I'm actually going to get a length. It just knows the length of that. Okay, and so I'll say OK. And now we'll double click this. And if we change it to a 0.4, then it's still a conic shape, but 0.4 is less than 0.5, so that would be an elliptical shape. And that's important for these conical shapes are important for all kinds of designs in the engineering world. Okay, let's continue our discussion of filleting by looking at another starter model. Okay, we'll come here, we'll select our fillet option. And I would like to fit a fillet around the base of this here, so I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to say OK. And that's kind of a sharp looking edge, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to double click this fillet, and I'm going to pick this option here. And that really makes a nice rounded corner around there. But you know what? I didn't really want to add this line to this fillet going vertically. Okay, so I'm going to double click this, and I'm going to turn that one off. So I've got this sharp edge, but now let's come over here and do it just slightly differently. Let's pick the fillet icon. Let's pick this fillet, this edge and this edge, and you'll notice in my bucket now I've got two edges. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the More option. Bring this over here so you can see it a little better. And for the edges to keep, I'm going to select in that box, and I'm going to pick this one. That's going to actually make the ball that's rolling down this edge roll around that edge and keep that edge. That edge is not going to be violated. We're going to do a preview and say OK. Now that is a nice rounded corner with the edges to keep. Now let's come around on this side and let's create a little bit more starter geometry. Let's create a circle. It's right here. Comes up, and let's make a very shallow, maybe let's make it 5 millimeters tall. Okay, there we go. And I'd like to put a fillet in down here that's 10 millimeters. So I'm going to select my fillet option. I'm going to pick that. Now, if I key in 10 millimeters, I'm going to get an error because there's not enough height there for this to make it. But if I pick the edges to keep, and I pick that edge as the edge to keep, my little, think of it as a ball bearing that's rolling around that red edge, is going to run right on that purple line. It's going to keep that line. And now you see that that is a nice edges to keep. Now let's double click this option for the circle, and let's bring that circle actually closer to the edge. So close to the edge that that fillet is going to run off it when we get out of Sketcher here. We'll say OK, and we'll hit the update button and see what happens to the edge here when that fillet gets close to the edge. It actually starts to have the edge rise up. Let's make it even come a little closer. Let's make it come a bit closer yet, still to the edge. Get out of Sketcher. Okay, and update. Wow, it's really rising up now. Let's put another sketch over on this other side. And on this other side, you know what? Let's put them both in the same sketch. Okay, so let's double click this one. Let's go to Sketcher, and I'm going to move this one well over here, and I am going to put another sketch right here, close to this edge. Okay, there we go. and update. So now this one is run off. Now this one would run off too, but let's try something here. Let's fillet this edge first. Let's fillet this edge, and let's fillet it at, we're going to try for 10. Well, it seemed to make it okay. And now let's do a fillet here with a edge to keep on top. Say okay. So now look at how this looks. This fillet has kind of run down on this edge and up and around. Now let's fillet this edge here. So you'll notice they have two completely different looks to the fillets. This one kind of runs up and it goes kind of across the top there. And this one has a completely different look to it. So the order in which you pick your elements for filleting can make a dramatic difference in how the fillets look. And finally, we'll do one last option in this basics of solid filleting. Let's pick the fillet icon, and let's pick this edge. And we're going to show this limiting element. I'm going to put my mouse in here, and I'm going to pick this planar surface, which would intersect this curve. And then I'm going to come around here, and I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to say preview and OK. So it now has set that to be exactly the distance between those. If I double click it again and I say go this way and that way, say OK, I get a much different result. If I double click it and I go to my bag of elements and I delete one of the elements, then of course you get exactly what you would expect. That brings us to the end of this introduction to the fillets. We'll go over the rest of the options in another video.